Welcome. First of all, I'm very excited because this is actually the inaugural recording of a Wingate Media podcast, video, whatever you want to call it. And I'm very honored to have someone who is not only someone in the news cycle who knows what's going on, but also someone who has great rabbinic aspirations. So it's a pleasure to welcome Douglas Hauer Gilad, who served as a assistant professor in Boston University School of Law. And welcome.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. And I was an adjunct faculty member at Boston University School of Law for about 7 years, teaching professional responsibility, immigration law, and Jewish law. So I was very integrated at BU, even though I was an adjunct.
And so I published an article about the great purge of Jews from academia, and your name came up there. You were a professor, adjunct professor there. You're not there anymore. We spoke about Shai Davidai and other Will Sussman, other people who were in academia before October 7th. They find themselves out. How did we get from point A to point B? Share with us what happened. You were at Boston University, now you're not. What happened?
Of course, it was a gradual recognition on my part that there was no room for me at BU as somebody who's Jewish, Zionist, and Israeli American. After October 7th, I was very active on many fronts, both in the United States and Israel, on behalf of the hostages. And I was quite vocal in social media. And when I really got more engaged with social media, I noticed that in my feed, there was a Rutgers professor who was appearing who published quite frequently and was definitely anti-Israel. And that at its face didn't bother me. I mean, live in the United States. I value free speech. There is room for heterogeneity and for different viewpoints on many issues, the war in Israel included. But where things changed for me, really, it was in 2024, where I sent a few emails to this individual. And the reason I contacted her is that Boston University had actually employed her or had her as a visiting guest lecturer or visiting professor for a year between 21 and 22. And she was still listed as an anti-bigotry fellow with the now defunct Center for Anti-Racist Research at Boston University. And the thing that struck me was that her social media had gone beyond the political and into the violent. For instance, she had liked and republished a posting that denied the rape of Jewish and Israeli women in the very first days after October 7th. The other thing that really pushed me to contact her and to lawfully protest what she was saying is that her social media reproduced blood libel tropes against Jews. And specifically, there was a tragic shooting of Palestinian American kids in Vermont in 2023, which we all deplore. We all stand against violence. And this professor, who again was listed as an anti bigotry fellow at BU, this very school that I taught at, that I was teaching Jewish law at, had come out on social media saying that Jews had blood on their hands, or rather, Zionists had blood on their hands for those tragic shootings. And then I started really to press Boston University's leadership. Why is somebody who uses violent imagery, anti Semitic imagery in social media, getting the benefit of being listed as an anti bigotry fellow at the school that I was teaching at? How does that make Jewish students, Jewish faculty feel when they see that someone who really promotes violence in social media is lauded and held out as an anti bigotry fellow? And I got the runaround. So all through 2024, I got the, very vague responses from the president's office and from other leaders at Boston University. And I pushed, I protested. My protests were always lawful and civil. And in December, I was informed that this individual had filed a Title IX complaint against me, as well as a police report, inferring that I was violent.
Wow, wow, wow. Okay, so just a lot to unpack there. I assume we're not naming this individual, but you have someone who is a professor at Rutgers University. They are listed as an anti-bigotry fellow, which is insane. They're listed as an anti-bigotry fellow in your institution, Boston University. You protest. I saw some of the things that she posted, which outrageous, and actually she appears in a Senate document documenting her anti-Semitism, because she gets herself in trouble elsewhere as well for being anti-Semitic, and she refers to Hamas as resistance. The whole really vile stuff about the Jewish people, about Israel, Zionism, whatever it is, and that person, then you're upset because it's listed as someone teaching with you, and so you're upset. You send an email, and next thing you know, or three emails you said, and next thing you know is there's a Title IX complaint. Where does this complaint go to? Does it go to does it go to the dean of the school? Does it go to some student office? Where's this going?
So let me set the table for a second on Title IX and give you a 30-second crash course. So Title IX is a civil rights law that primarily is functioning to protect vulnerable campus members from sexual harassment and stalking and bad behavior. Title IX is a critical feature of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It operates as it has an important function on our campuses. It protects the most vulnerable from people who might be engaging in sexual harassment, but where that sexual harassment or that conduct would not necessarily be punishable through a report to the police. So, in other words, Title IX is important. What happened here is that Title IX was weaponized against me. And it was weaponized in a fraudulent manner. This individual
Now,
contacted.
just to go on the record here, it wasn't just that this anti-Semitic individual did it on their own, even though they weren't in your institution. They need, as they call it, an inside job. They needed
This
someone.
was an inside job. The only thing you could say is it looks a lot like the Soviet, Hungarian, and East German show trials of Jews in the 50s. It was like central casting of a show trial. You had this individual approach friends at Boston University who supposedly were committed to diversity and equity. I guess not if you want to include Jews there, but she went to them and sent an email that I have not shared with you, that was completely defamatory against my character and false. And one of the most powerful people at Boston University, who, by the way, defended this individual when she was investigated by Congress throughout 2024. So this person who complained about me, to be specific and precise, was under investigation by Congress.
Wow.
For stirring up and inflaming anti-Semitism at Rutgers in 24. So, this person gets one of the most powerful
Their
people.
reputation precedes them, as we say.
Reputation precedes them. And she gets one of the most powerful people at Boston University, the Associate Provost, Victoria Sahani, to act as a mandated reporter. What is a mandated reporter in Title IX? If you're in a university setting and you notice that a professor sexually harasses someone and you're on faculty, you're called a mandated reporter. You should report. You have a legal duty to go and report what you saw. This was absurd. This individual at Rutgers hasn't set foot on Boston University in like 2 years or 3 years. And she thought that she would engage her friend, enlist her friends in a report to the Equal Opportunity Office of BU. Where things really went downhill from my standpoint. This happened at the end of December 2024. I was notified December 27th. I resigned when there seemed to be potentially fraud, and I wasn't sure. I resigned on January 5th, and I told the dean of the law school, I cannot teach at BU. And by the way, the dean was begging me to come back, which I was being accused of stalking. You have to understand, when I was told this report was filed against me, I was accused of stalking, which is sexual misconduct under BU's Title IX policy. I'm a gay guy. Not that that matters, but my spouse is a guy. I'm not sexually harassing or engaging in gender-based discrimination against this individual. I'm protesting her anti-Semitism. And when I sensed that things were not going to be fair, where I potentially was going to be open to exposure, vulnerable, potentially to more adverse conduct by Boston University at the top, I resigned. And then about 5 days later, learned from BU's own Title IX office that there was potentially fraud in the Title IX report. And that fraud, to be very specific, was Victoria Sahani, the associate provost of the university, stating to the Title IX office and to the BU police that this person at Rutgers was a visiting professor at Boston University. Like real time, like when the report was filed, she was a visiting professor. False. Hashtag fraud, hashtag anti-Semitism, hashtag overcharge the Jew.
Let me just unpack that, because that was a lot to unpack. So how do we go from this situation where you have the person that's a renowned anti-Semite, I think is the proper term, right? You have someone who's a renowned anti-Semite. As you say, her name is precedes her, and she's under investigation with Congress, with the Senate, and she is obviously not a friend of our people. She is not even there at Boston University, files a complaint about you because you emailed about her vile anti-Semitism, and they go to the police. How do we even get to such a place? Meaning, as you said, you're a liberal gay Jewish person, cares about cares about all the things that the law school should value: human rights, diversity, everything. And they go and they call the police on you. Essentially, they go to the police.
Because I'm a Zionist, I'm violent. Because I'm Israeli, I'm violent. That's the reasoning. And it's disturbing.
Meaning to them, the fact that you're okay, that you're liberal, you're gay, you're Jewish, but you're Zionist, and that they won't forgive, and that they won't let pass, and for that they'll call the police and potentially accept a fraudulent report. Can you see any other group member that another person that would be targeted this way?
No, and if I were a good Jew, which means if I were an anti-Zionist, and if I applauded River to the Sea, and if I was bashing Israel, I would be a treasured member of Boston University School of Law's DEI group, right? But I'm not. At the time that October 7th happened and throughout 2024, what did I experience? My entire extended family of my spouse is in bomb shelters, safe rooms. Their kids are being sent into Gaza to fight. They're being pulled out of their jobs to go and fight and experiencing trauma. This war has created a scar on our people like no other since the Holocaust. And I was standing up for my people. I was standing up as a Jew, as Israeli, and as a Zionist. And I did the right thing. Where I think BU fell short is that they were deliberately indifferent to my concerns about anti-Semitic bias at the beginning. I raised to the office of BU's general counsel through my lawyer that this Title IX complaint is tainted with anti-Semitic bias. That concern was fully dismissed. I had to be the one to explain to BU's Title IX office that their own chief inclusion officer or the head of inclusion at BU, Victoria Sahani, had lied to them in order to ensnare me in a show trial. The objective here was to have me removed from BU. That was the
Horrible.
objective. And I wasn't willing. Look, I was at the time, I was still a partner at a major Boston law firm. I have a lot going on. I have great things happening in my life. One of the hard things at the time in my life was all of the pain and suffering of our family in Israel. I wasn't about to subject myself to walking into a classroom at BU knowing that people right under the president had it in for me. And that was what was going on.
Wow. Shai Davidai resigned this past week from Colombia, and I imagine also he has a similar situation where you don't want to deal with it. You don't want to be dragged through the mud by anti-Semites. And I guess my question to you is something that he posted about. Uh, did anybody reach out to you? Do you feel that this was only the inclusion office, whoever it might have been, or is this more endemic? Is this did it, what after you left? I don't want to compare it, but like in Germany, other places, right? You had the neighbor in the 1930s that was there one day and was gone the next day, and no one said a thing. And my question is, did anybody say anything once you were no longer at BU, or were people actually supportive?
No, I had friends on faculty. No one really stood up for me. No one wanted to take the risk. It was very actually hurtful to me that there was a professor at BU who politically is quite different from me and is an anti-Zionist. And I've admired her for 30 years and I have love for her still. I don't think she would ever even look at me again. I knew I was going to face being ostracized because I was no longer Doug, the great guy that would come in and help out and do anything for students that he could, to a loud Zionist. And this is what happens when you permit things like Title IX to be weaponized. You have people ganging up on other people and using civil rights protections to actually strip others of civil rights. And this was intentional. I want to make it clear that the professor from Rutgers who was behind this, along with the people at BU who orchestrated this, they are perfectly fluent and knowledgeable about Title IX. They knew this was a sham proceeding from the get-go, which is why Professor Sahani chose to lie to her own Title IX office. And that, to me, was one of the most striking things. The other thing that really was sad for me was that the dean, whom I cherished, at the end of the day, wasn't going to stick up for me. And that was visible. And that's why I could not stay at the school.
Wow. Now you said that they accuse you of stalking. So in a way, your Jewish identity is under attack, but you are gay, and it just makes their claim just all the more insane. And you mentioned that there was also an episode where Students for Justice in Palestine attacked that part of your identity as well. Can you speak about that?
Oh, of course. So I don't have the same profile as a Shai Davidai. I'm a little quieter, but I also have a different professional universe, right? So I'm I don't want to say modulated because that makes Shia cast in a negative light, and I think he's heroic and has done amazing things. We're different personalities. I approached a group at an encampment early on after October 7th, and there was a group of students, including several female students, and I said, "Wait a second, you realize that Hamas raped women?" And I said, "Do you understand that if I went into Gaza as a gay Jew, as somebody who's gay and who is Israeli Jewish, I would be killed? Like, that's it. There would be no conversation. I would just be killed." And a few of the people there knew me and said, "We know about you. You're pink washing for Israel. You're not really gay." And I thought that was kind of humorous because, I mean, I'd been married to a guy for 30 years. So I went home and said to my Israeli spouse, who's a guy, who we were, by the way, pioneers in pressing for recognition of civil marriage of same sex couples in Israel in the early 2000s. I said, it was all a scheme. I'm not really gay. This has been a big scheme to pinkwash for Israel. Uh, and we had a good laugh about it. But it just shows you where
No,
the
no, but just to
conversation's
be
gone.
clear, if they said that just to another person, they would have been expelled for that, right? If they would just be targeting people for their identity like that, they would be expelled.
Absolutely right. And the thing that strikes me the most, and I guess that's really a good place to sort of come full circle, is why did I speak out and why am I speaking out now and why am I not letting go of what happened? It's because after this occurred, multiple faculty members who are Jewish and staff members, as well as students, came to me when they learned of it and they said, look, we can't speak out because we're afraid. If one professor says to me from the law school, if I speak out, then I'm going to have job insecurity.
Wow.
And I heard that, and I'm an established lawyer. I was a partner for many years at a big law firm in Boston. I'm in a rabbinical school. I have the luxury at 54 of retooling as a rabbi and doing things for civil rights and global human rights. And I never thought I'd be fighting for myself, but I'm not just fighting for myself. I'm fighting for the people at BU. I don't speak for them, but I'm fighting for them. And I'm fighting for them to have a better place to be because I think BU at its core is a good school. I don't think schools are anti-Semitic. I think people that work in schools, and BU would be included in that, you know, need some retooling and training on how to really be diverse and accepting.
And it's hard for me to escape the thought that BU was home to the great Eli Wiesel, and they actually have, I believe, most of his library, and a place that should have known better than anyone else that you can't be silent, and it's the silence that actually hurts the most. It's just hard to imagine that in that same place. I mean, I can just imagine having this conversation with Eli Wiesel saying, look, here's what's going on, not somewhere overseas, but in your local court. Very, very difficult, as you say, both the actual incident, but also the silence of other faculty and the silence of people who see their Jewish colleagues suffering in silence. It's just hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, or and adding to that, the well-meaning people, Jewish and non-Jewish, who try to frame it all away. That's what we see right now going on. Frame away, reframe, resituate, re-explain what's going on, not as anti-Semitism, but as, free speech, academic freedom. There's nothing academic about blaming Jews for a crime Jews didn't commit. There's nothing,
Yeah.
um, that's not okay. And BU needs that message, and I'm afraid that they have not gotten the message. So I'm going to push on
Mhm.
until I think that the president of BU and leadership at BU starts to take this more seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. They're not there to say thank you, but there are just countless faculty and students who need this advocacy that you're doing and appreciate it. So thank you, Douglas Hauer, Gilad, for your putting yourself out there, calling out BU for what happened. We hope that if there's a way to right this wrong, it is, and definitely the anti-Semites, and I say anti-Semites because it's more than one that made this injustice possible are held accountable.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate everything you're doing.
All right, thank you.